Hello, I'm Lizzie Harper of www.lizzieharper.co.uk, and today I'm going to do a test on different hot press watercolour papers. Recently the Botanical illustration community has been having spasms because one of the papers that a lot of us use, or used to use, Fabriano Classico and Fabriano Artistico, the surface has changed and it's not as smooth as it used to be, and it is slightly woolly and it doesn't hold crisp lines anymore. So lots and lots of botanical illustrators out there are searching for an alternative. And my plan today is to check out 5 of the alternatives just by painting on each one for an hour and giving you my feedback on which one I think I'll be using going forward. So let's get going. I'm going to be testing 5 replacement hot press papers today. They are Moulin du Roi hot press, Arches hot press, Canson Heritage hot press, Saunders Waterford from St Cuthbert's Mill, Botanical Ultra Smooth also from St Cuthbert's Mill. First up is the Moulin du Roi paper. Okay, so my thoughts about Moulin du Roi paper are, I made some notes as I went along. You can rub out okay on it. Very pale washes, it takes beautifully, that's nice. It does very crisp edges and it certainly holds the line, which is the problem we had with Fabriano. However, if you want the paint to move within a wet wash, it doesn't really do that. You have to pull the paint around. In some areas the size of the top of it is it repels paint slightly until you go over it twice. It's a minor problem. My biggest problem is when you put a wash on top of detail, it lifted the detail, so then you have to do the detail again. You can work into, once the wash is dried, you can work into it again, but it means if you lay down your detail then put a watercolour wash on, you lose some of the detail because the paint lifts. But the paper doesn't bleed. It's certainly an option. It's certainly, I like it, but I'm not entirely convinced. Now I've finished testing the Arches hot press with my very quick picture of a forget-me-not, and I would say it's very good for crisp edges. It's not as crisp as the Moulin du Roi, but it's still crisp, and it takes the colour very well. The colours seem brighter than on the Moulin du Roi. My complaint is once you've got a wash that's dry, when you work into it with more colour, that tends to stain. So unless you move pretty darn fast, you get margins where the initial paint has been applied to the page before you move it around, which is a slight problem for me. When you rub it rubs out fine if it's just graphite, but if there's paint on top of the graphite, that seems to be slightly problematic. I like it. It's not as crisp as the Moulin, and the issues with the second layer of paint on top of a wash staining the page, so to speak, that could mean that it's not necessarily the paper for me. For testing is Canson Heritage hot press. Okay, so my feelings about Canson Heritage Hot Press. The paper feels and looks rough. It was unusual for me. I felt like I was working on a cheap watercolour paper. But saying that, it actually worked surprisingly well. It held details and lines very nicely. It was fine to draw on. It was fine to paint on. Some subsequent layers were a little blurrier, but it held washes okay. It was a little bit odd. When I was finished with the violet study, I sort of felt that I felt somehow that there was a lack of depth to the tone and that the colour wasn't quite as intense as it had been when I first applied it, so I'm not sure quite what that was about. It rubs out okay as well. Yeah, it's fine, but it sort of felt very rough to me as I was working on it, even though the result was okay. I'm not going to be using this one going forward, but I think it's a very good option, and it's performed an awful lot better than I thought it was going to. Next up, Saunders Waterford. So my feelings about the Saunders Waterford new improved surface. Well, there you can see the texture of this paper. It did hold its edges quite nicely. It held detail. It felt very soft to draw on, which made me feel a bit uncomfortable, but it didn't blur pencil lines. Painting on it, it was lovely. It held the vibrancy of colour better than any of the other ones I've tried, and there was certainly no loss of detail with subsequent washes. The only slight thing is, once I'd finished with it, doing all my tests, I looked at it again and it was as if it had kind of become blurrier after I'd finished. So I'm not quite sure why that might be. Doing a watercolour wash on it, that worked fine as well, although because you can see the texture of the page, there is a slight texture within a dry watercolour wash. Rubbing out, it's okay, but it does dent the paper because the paper's smooth. Soft. Yeah, it's a good paper. I like it. I'm considering it. The last of the papers I'm testing today is Botanical Ultra Smooth, which I've used before and quite like. Let's see if it beats the other options. So, what are my feelings about Botanical Ultra Smooth paper? Do you know what? My feelings about Botanical Ultra Smooth paper aren't very good. The texture looks lovely. It looks smooth as anything, and it's beautiful to draw on. And the first layer of paint goes on like a dream, really crisp. But subsequent layers, I don't even know what happens. They just feel terribly muddy. I don't even feel that you lose the detail. It's almost like the paint's just become muddy and clogged up on the page. And the edges don't hold as crisply as they should. For me, it's a real disappointment because it's sold as a replacement for Fabriano, and it's not the replacement for Fabriano. What conclusions have I drawn from these tests? Well, my main conclusion is that I miss Fabriano. None of these are good replacements, really. However, out of all of them, the ones that are working best for me is Arch's Hot Press, although when you rub it out and it leaves the white paint and it compromises the paint, that's a real problem. And Moulin du Roy. I enjoyed working on it, but I felt it lost some of the vibrancy of the colour. So I'm going to be buying these two papers in the future and seeing which one sits easiest with me. But the conclusion, I'm afraid, is there is not, as far as I know yet, a good replacement for Fabriano Classico and Fabriano Artistico. And I think the whole botanical illustration community, as well as me, is really missing that paper. thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you want to see examples of my illustration work, please visit www.lizzieharper.co.uk. Thank you. Bye bye.